Hi, my name is Andrea Kupfer-Schneider, Professor of Law and Director of the Institute for Women's Leadership at Marquette University. In honor of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and in recognition of how important women are in this current election, we are delighted to bring you our virtual conference on women's suffrage and innovation. How is innovation linked with voting? To understand both the history of the women's suffrage movement and the current evolution of voting rights is to examine innovation in political activism, intellectual empowerment, and inventive women. We hope you will enjoy all 8 segments on this important subject. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome to this session on girls, women, and intellectual empowerment. What you're about to watch is a discussion between Dr. Kim Garcher, an associate professor at Kent State University and an affiliated faculty member in the College of Graduate Studies at Northeastern Ohio Medical University, and me, Dr. Melissa Hsu. I'm a visiting assistant professor of philosophy at Marquette University, and I also work in the Center for Teaching and Learning. As part of the steering committee at the Institute for Women in Leadership for the Suffrage Conference, I want to thank you all for watching this talk and hope you enjoy what you're about to listen to, which is a discussion of a book called Philosophy for Girls, An Invitation to the Life of Thought, and it's coming out this month from Oxford University Press. Enjoy. Hi everyone, thank you for watching this video. It is part of the celebration of suffrage hosted by the Institute for Women in Leadership at Marquette University. My name is Dr. Melissa Hsu, and I am on the steering committee for this great conference. And I am so happy not only to be celebrating the centennial of suffrage at Marquette University and in our country, but also that this conference coincides with a really exciting book that's coming out this month with Dr. Kim Garcher. So Dr. Kim Garcher, she is an associate professor at Kent State University and is one of my very best friends. And we just edited a book written by 20 women in philosophy. And it's for our younger counterparts in philosophy, say 16 to 24 years old. And it is called Philosophy for Girls, An Invitation to the Life of Thought. It is published by Oxford University, and since one of the themes of this conference is women and intellectual empowerment, the IWL at Marquette thought that this would be a good chance to highlight what intellectual empowerment really means for girls and young women, especially in the wake of our civic responsibilities to be agents of positive change in the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about this book and talk about the process by which we generated it. But first, I really want to thank Dr. Kim Garcher for joining this session today. And I want to say that it's been such a joy to work with you, Kim, to make this book, which everyone describes as a labor of love. And it has been both, of course, labor and love. And I want to say that it's been wonderful to work with you because, of course, we're good friends, which is what makes this project so enjoyable. But I really appreciate that we come from different backgrounds in philosophy. We met in grad school, but we really became friends after grad school. And I know that one of your passions and one of your areas of expertise is American pragmatism. And so I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about American pragmatism and kind of this moment in time in our country's history.
Absolutely. So one of the areas I specialize in is American pragmatism. It's perhaps not one of the most well-known subfields of philosophy, but it's the philosophy that developed in America at the turn of the last century, responding to specifically American place, location, needs, right? That it was a very physically located philosophy. And in light of that, right, then we were still experiencing sort of this American experiment. There are several themes that recur in American pragmatism very regularly. One of those is a dedication to democracy, and not just democracy, but participatory democracy, where you're actually engaging each other, exchanging ideas, working toward a better world, which gets us to the second theme, which is Ameliorism, right? Americans at that point in time, even as they moved through the beginning of World War I, were incredibly hopeful, right? And there's this huge upwelling of the ameliorism possible in the world in American pragmatism. And what I mean by that is a simple belief that the world can get better and that we can make it better. There's no formula, of course, but the fact is that it's possible, right? It is a possible goal. Another theme that comes up in philosophy all the time is, or in pragmatism, is community and the relationship between individual and community. And so if you take these ideas together, right, you have individuals working in communities, right, attempting to make the world better using a kind of informed and participatory democracy to do so. So I think this kind of philosophy, pragmatism, lends itself exceptionally well to the themes of the conference. And also it comes up in our book, obviously, as we take the book to be a very ameliorative, dialogical practice. But yeah, I feel that this moment in time where we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of suffrage and yet seeing such dramatic call for change, right? This crisis time is a time that philosophy can help us. It can help guide us.
I love that. And sometimes I think, and this is absolutely true, sometimes I think that especially young people feel hopeless in a moment. And I think that, and one thing that brings us together as friends is that we're educators, and we see these young people with their really big questions, you know, and we want to honor those questions. And for me as an educator, what I'm trying to communicate, and I know you do too, is that all is not lost. And one thing I hear you saying is that American pragmatism is one way to think about how collective action, thinking about what it means to be fully autonomous in a society, which involves, of course, the right to vote. And of course, even when suffrage happened, not all people, not all women were able to enact their right to vote, especially Black women, right? Were discouraged, and there was voter suppression and so on. But this idea that there's nothing that we can accomplish, we need to put a stop to this. And it is so important to be able to empower all people in their capacity as knowers and in their right as citizens to work toward that change.
Because this next generation, however you want to name the next generation, they have no idea how much power they actually have, right? We know right now that they can outvote baby boomers. I don't think that is something they comprehend, that they literally can change their world simply by voting and change it drastically and immediately. And so I think this conference is pushing on not just the celebration of suffrage and democracy, but also, you know, intellectual empowerment and innovation. These people are going to run the world, and I'm very glad for that. Actually, I'm tired of our generation messing it up.
True. Okay, so let's maybe talk about the book a little bit. So this book is called Philosophy for Girls, An Invitation to the Life of Thought. And as I said, it really connects with the theme of intellectual empowerment for this conference. And by intellectual empowerment, I and we mean especially young women knowing that they have a right to their ideas and that their ideas have value. This does not therefore mean that their ideas are always right, but they have a right to their ideas and that those ideas have value. So one thing that I often tell my students is, and it's a little bit just over the top sincere, but I mean it, but that who they are and what they think and how they think matters. Yeah. And I think that going with what you were saying, this power that young people have to enact change, this starts with ideas.
Yes.
We notice that there's a problem or there's an opportunity to create or we want to change things. And that starts with having a full concept of an idea. And what we see in our discipline of philosophy is that women, and certainly girls, have historically been completely marginalized or excluded. If you look at most of the introductory textbooks in philosophy, they are dominated by men chapters written and drawn by men. Sometimes still, if there are women in anthologies, they're relegated to sections called women. And Kim and I realized that this is a big problem. So what happened was, for this book, which is really pitched at 16 to 24-year-olds, so kind of that 18-year-old going off to college or going into the world, this curious reader, what happened was we wanted to offer a correction to this just complete male dominance in philosophy. So about a decade ago, I was teaching at Marquette University, and like Kim, I had just young woman after young woman in my classes who never spoke or who rarely spoke, and they would write these brilliant essays, and I'd get them in my office and I'd say, "You are so bright, you are working so hard, can you please maybe talk in class?" And they were always so uncertain in their ideas. Now for me, I also didn't really talk in class, and so I understand that and I want to respect it, but it occurred to me kind of all at once that in the history of philosophy, there is just a lack of women, and most essays are written by men, and our profession is, I think, 80% or 87% male dominated, right? And there's not a lot of space for young women. So this idea was kind of born all at once in my office: philosophy for girls, this needs to exist. And what happened was, I did not fully write it as I intended, and a few years ago I realized that this book needed to be born more than I needed to write it, and I realized that I wouldn't be able to do it by myself. And so I asked Kim if she would come on to this project, and I can honestly say that this book would not be born without you. And that what I love most of all is that we bring distinct but complementary perspectives, and we are united around the central concern for justice and equity for women in philosophy. So this book, as an invitation then, is a compilation of 20 essays written by expert women, some of whom are kind of public facing, some of whom are famous in our discipline, and some of whom are not. We'll talk about that process in a minute. But that we are all united in this love to support this, as Kim was saying, this next generation of women thinkers. So Kim, I don't know if you want to maybe talk about your experience with coming onto this project, and then we can talk a little bit about the process of it.
So I have absolutely adored every moment of working on this project with you. From the beginning, your idea was so clear and so powerful in and of itself that the path seemed very apparent from the beginning, right? Even as we figured out what we were supposed to, how to do it, right? The goal of empowering young women was the light at the end of the tunnel, and therefore we easily remained on track. And I think, again, working together is such a valuable process because we're learning. Sorry.
That's all right.
My dog agrees. To communicate, right, cross-culturally and through academic tradition and even just through some fields of philosophy. So it's been an absolute joy, and the project has taken up so much of my life that it feels almost now like, what do I do? Because it was such a huge and important focus for me. And I'll just say that I'm looking forward to the second one already.
And let's hope that there is a second one. And I should add here that this is, and this is something that's worth talking about. This is Kim's first time and my first time doing a project like this. And so we learned a lot. And it's worth thinking about intellectual empowerment in terms of that learning curve, right? Mm-hmm. Because we learned a lot. We learned how to write a substantial book proposal. We learned how to communicate with different potential publishers. We learned how to decide which publisher to go with. Thank you, Oxford. We learned how to work with editors. And I think that this is all very much in the spirit of this collaborative desire to create in our world. Because if there's one thing that I know I have realized in my own life, it's that if I don't work for it and try to make it happen, it's not coming to me. Someone else is not going to do this, right? So in the theme of intellectual empowerment here, again, I asked Kim.
Project itself of intellectual empowerment, right?
Exactly.
Exactly in the same way that I learned a ton, and I feel quite confident that I can do it again. And so it was, enacted as we're writing about intellectual empowerment.
Absolutely. And what has happened, not only has our friendship strengthened, I think, but I think we too have become more confident in our ability to be able to do something like this again, and then also be able to provide this support to young women.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share to get to the book to talk about it a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about this book and highlight the awesome table of contents and point to a few chapters that are especially relevant to the theme of suffrage. And so here is our book's website on Oxford University Press. And we are going to look at the table of contents real quick. What we wanted to do, because this book is so novel, what we wanted to do is we wanted to have the chapters break into sections that were identifiable in our discipline of philosophy. So we have 4 different sections with 20 chapters total. The first section is on the nature of the self. This is a big issue for everyone in philosophy. What constitutes the self? Who am I? This is especially a big question for young people, although I'm 43 and it's a big question for me too. But we really wanted to highlight this idea of what a self is not always immediately transparent or knowable. The second section is knowing, and this corresponds to a field in philosophy called epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, what we can know and how we know it. The third section is on social structure and power relations. So this is what in philosophy is known as social and political philosophy. And the fourth section is on contemplation and action. And that is a Jesuit-related phrase that gets to ethics. So what does it mean to enact these ideas? What does it mean to put them into play? And what is our ethical response to these big issues? So in thinking about the themes of this conference, I know for me, chapter 17 on consciousness raising is an important one because to me, there are echoes of suffrage in that chapter, right? And so consciousness raising has to do with how people do come together individually to make an aggregate of people to be able to enact change. Now, that consciousness raising is not just action. There's a whole process that you come to see in terms of strategizing. We see this in our world now in terms of thinking about which kinds of ideas to commit to, in terms of planning and so on. And Kim, I was wondering if maybe you wanted to point out a chapter or two that you think is relevant or germane right now, even in this moment, as we're looking at voting or in the theme of suffrage.
I think the chapter on credibility is absolutely central right now for all young people, but especially for women. We know that there is a gendered aspect to trusting yourself and trusting your ability to think. We've been talking about that all along. And credibility, coming to own one's thinking, right, is so crucial right now in this moment. But coming to your own self, which gets us to the chapters in the section self that we start with. I think it's absolutely fabulous that this book begins with self, because so many young women are socialized to think first of others, right? That self is not always the first interrogation, right? I'm not claiming that they don't think about themselves a lot, but in terms of intellectual interrogation,
yeah,
often it's about needs of others, how the others work, how the world works. And so I think it's very powerful to start this book with identity and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
The third chapter in self is pride, right? Pride. And this, I think, connects to this idea of credibility, right? And knowing one's ideas are worth expression, knowing one's ideas are worthy of expression and worthy of the work that it takes to express them, knowing one's ideas are legitimately or should legitimately demand interaction with other ideas, right? That they cannot be easily dismissed. That these ideas are in the public sphere, the conversational sphere, just like other ideas are, right? And that they deserve time and attention. And sometimes they're not going to be good ideas, admittedly, right? But young women's ideas deserve the work of trying to understand them, just as anyone else. And so I find these four chapters actually work really well together in terms of intellectual empowerment and innovation as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, for me as well, so much of this is it's not about being right. You know, we live in a world in which you're constantly on display in terms of being right. And if you're not right, you're then canceled. Or if you misstep, you're canceled. And for me in philosophy, and very compatible with what you're saying, is it's important to recognize the questions that we do have. And this kind of got this started in my own thinking in terms of how questions themselves can be existentially transformative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we tend to orient our world in terms of informational questions, you know, who sang that song, or how do I get to place X? And we can get those answers very readily. But when it comes to our discipline of philosophy, if we're being really honest with ourselves, as you were saying, we recognize that we have these big questions too, and that often these questions are lifelong. And rather than, you know, put up a facade and say, I can't know, or I don't know, this is really an invitation to enter into those questions by expert women who have written their butts off to show you some of these questions. So to take a step back maybe and think about the structure of this book, the structure of the book is as follows. Each chapter starts with an anecdote about a girl or woman from history or mythology or science. There's some chapters that start with Medusa. There's one that starts with Mary Shelley. And the idea here is that you get an anecdote that then opens up a chapter topic. As we said, some of the people that we first invited onto this book, these are a little more public facing and they're well known in philosophy. And that was important. We wanted their work in particular in this book. But as a matter of justice, and because there's a lot of philosophy being done by people who maybe aren't as well known, we put out a call for proposals for chapters. And this was a great part of the process, at least for me. Kim and I, pre-coronavirus, sat at a table and we had these big pieces of butcher paper and we're just going through and keeping track and thinking about the composition of the book. For me, this is one of my favorite moments. And, you know, we saw the book taking shape. We made some strategic decisions that not everyone would agree with. And I love that it's a little bit countercultural in this way. So for instance, if you look at the section on knowing, that section begins with logic, with an incredible essay by Gillian Russell about a feminist approach to logic. It's incredible. And then we ended it with a chapter on art, because Kim and I think that too often in philosophy, ideas are siloed and we think that art or aesthetics has nothing to do with knowing. And Kim and I say, absolutely not. So if you look at that section, it's really countercultural. But anyhow, what we did was we put out this call for papers and we were grateful to receive a lot of submissions. And then we had to go through the hard work of wrangling this book. And so what we have here is a very pluralistic approach to philosophy. You have tenured and emerita philosophers who wrote some chapters. You also have some assistant professors who wrote some chapters. We have everyone from kind of the higher end, more prestigious universities to community colleges. We have people from different backgrounds. It's very ethnically and racially diverse. And we are so proud that this group of women, most of whom don't know each other, and we don't know them, except one, and each other, of course, we're able to come together to produce this extremely coherent and lively and vibrant book. The other part of which is that all of the chapters rely heavily on sourcing women philosophers. As someone who studies Greek philosophy, it was hard for me to write a chapter about questions without talking about Socrates all the time. But you know what? It was important to do so. And it's not like he's the only philosopher who's ever thought about questions. So by highlighting these women working in the history of philosophy and in our contemporary world, the book has this "you go girl" feel to it.
Sorry, trying to keep the dog from entering the conversation.
It's okay. There is a chapter on human and non-human animals. That's fantastic.
There is. Which is an important chapter. I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile to discuss our choice of the word girls, given the kind of challenge that we're talking about, right? That we are challenging, we're inviting young women into the life of thought, but that is in of itself a challenge to enter into the world, right? As beings, as intellectual and intellectually equal beings. And so I have been in love with the title Philosophy for Girls from the beginning. I think of girls, okay. We got pushback on the word girls, right? Because we know that it has been historically used to infantilize, to insult, to demean, to diminish. And we respect all of those aspects of the word, not to mention the fact that it points towards a gendered binary, which we know is an inaccurate description of binary, to say the least, or of gender, to say the least. And yet we stuck with girls. And I think it's awesome. Do you want to speak to that at all, Melissa?
Well, you did so much good work on this, and we both did in terms of researching this word girl and how it's even used in pop culture. So Kim and I have noticed for quite a while that there is a move to reclaim the word girl. And so in You Go Girl, there are lots of things, kind of hashtag girl, like a girl, and so on. This is something that has become a thing, right? Also, if you look at literary fiction, there are so many uses of the word girl in the title, even if the book is not about a girl as such. So the girl on the train, the girl with the dragon tattoo, and so on. But for us, and it is countercultural to say this, because there's nothing distinctly girly or non-girly about the act of thinking, but the sheer fact of the matter is 50% of the world's population has been basically excluded from philosophy and from intellectual life. And we want to make it known that this is not acceptable and that there is nothing wrong or inferior with identifying as a girl or gender non-binary or anything and doing philosophy. And so Philosophy for Girls then really highlights the exclusion of half of the world's population and specifically aims to do justice to that population. This is how I have always kind of thought of it. I also, though, will say that I expect that boys, men, allies, people who identify as all kinds of genders will read this book individually and also will use it in classrooms. I expect that teachers in high schools and universities, co-ed, single-sex schools, I expect that everyone will want to read this book, because what this book says is that women have something to say. And women came together to make this book that has something to say, that itself deserves an equal space on a bookshelf.
So if I could sum it up, I think we've used this word before, right? The word girls, that term is being reclaimed, and that term has some moxie, right?
Yeah.
Girls have moxie right now, and this book has moxie, right? So it is obviously an indication of the exclusion of women and girls from philosophy, but it's also meant to work as the sort of you go girl in the philosophy world, right? It's got moxie, and girls have moxie.
Totally. So to that end, let me share one anecdote, and then Kim, I'm going to ask you if we could maybe sum up this talk in thinking about courage, which is what your chapter is about. But a quick little anecdote. So I teach at Marquette University, and I taught at Marquette University for 5 years, and then I left to teach at an all-girls high school for 5 years in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I loved the girls. I loved them. I really loved them. And, you know, seeing them every day come in with doing their cartwheels and having their ideas and working their butts off. I taught English, but it was really philosophy, let's face it. And I had a philosophy club that had 25% of the school's population. And, you know, people say girls don't want these things, but you give them an opportunity and they want it. And they want it, and they want it so bad. So anyhow, I'm back at Marquette now, and I left that job 4 years ago, but it was quite a change for me going from teaching, you know, undergraduate and graduate classes at university level to 5 sections of freshmen in high school. And my last year there, I had a class of freshmen, so one class of 9th graders. And at the end of the year, this one girl who was amazing, she actually just gave the commencement address for the high school. She just graduated, right? So this was 4 years ago. But she came in and she gave me this little piece of wood. It says "Big and Brave" on it. And she put it on my desk and she said, "Dr. Shu, I made this for you." And I kind of laughed and I said, why did you make this for me? And then she just burst into laughter herself. And she goes, "Well, you only told us every freaking day to be big and brave with our ideas and our writing and our thinking." And, you know, it was funny because that was the year I left that school and went back to Marquette. And it's funny how, you know, a little 9th grader who's now graduated from high school, who you told to be big and brave, is saying it back to you. And I think that whether you're a freshman in high school, a freshman in college, wherever you are in your career, right? This is the spirit of this book. This is the spirit of female collaboration. This is the spirit of working with one of your best friends. And this is the spirit of bringing something beautiful into the world to make it just a little bit better. So I would like to maybe ask you to think about, because when I hear big and brave, one thing that I think about is courage, right? And not bravery in terms of militarism. And this is what your chapter shows so well. So if you would like to talk about that, please.
Yeah, I would just wanted to make one last comment though on the collaboration, which, you know, we all have many good friends and we enjoy these friends for various reasons, and we share different hobbies and interests and so on. But the joy of doing philosophical intellectual work with a friend, right? There is something so special about that. And to have it result in this book is very meaningful to me. So to have a friend that we can work through challenging ideas and disagreements and agreements and grief and joy and to work through philosophically with a friend is something pretty valuable, I think. And I think that young women and girls and boys and non-binary persons will find that this book could serve as that beginning for them.
Yeah, totally.
That they can pick up this book with their friend and they both read the section on autonomy, and they now have the capacity to have these amazing, intellectually vibrant conversations where they're learning about themselves and learning about the world and learning about their ability to change the world. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I'll move to my chapter on courage, which is subtitled Ameliarism in Motion. And so I spoke at the beginning about how Ameliarism is a very common theme in American philosophy. We fundamentally believe that the world can get better, right? Not that it will, but it's possible. And we fundamentally believe that humans are capable of making it better. Again, not that we will, but that it's possible, right? And I read that ameliorism through kind of this Aristotelian lens, whereas I tend to think in brief, right, that the job of human beings is to flourish and to help others flourish, right? And so if you take flourishing widely construed, right, that is about living and becoming better. And so I think it's natural in my mind that this is how I ended up writing my chapter. As Melissa pointed out, I worry that the term courage has been equivocated with the term bravery, right? So we often use those terms interchangeably. And we certainly need the idea of bravery, right? And there are loads of people who are brave and who do deserve that distinction. It is a title of honor. It should be lauded, right? Bravery is an amazing virtue to cultivate and enact. But I think we need to have a word that isn't quite bravery to talk about how we go about trying to make the world better. And I think that courage can be that word. So courage, I want to say, isn't bravery. It's not the same thing. Instead, courage is about understanding your situation, right? Which is a philosophical task. Coming to understand the situation that you are in and acting to make it better, knowing that you may fail, right? And accepting the consequences of failure should you fail, and you go again, right? You try again. So I think about it in terms of a comportment. And what I mean by that is a way of being in the world. How is it that we are in the world? How do we find ourselves in the world? How do we act in the world, right? And so I think what I'm trying to ask about here is developing a comportment of courage to act courageously. And this could be very small things, like telling your friend, please don't say that racist joke, to having difficult conversations with your colleagues when they say maybe microaggressions, to trying to decide how best to participate in the social change that's happening now, right? And even trying to decide who to vote for and how to campaign and these things, right?
For sure.
It's about finding that center and that place in the world, your comportment, such that you face the world empathetically, intellectually, and thinking that you can make it better. So I think that's what we try to do in this book.
For sure. And I think on that note, we should probably wrap this up and say, I am so appreciative for you as a friend and for your work on courage. And the moment that we're in right now does take a lot of courage. And November is going to be a great time of courage for many of us, regardless of what happens. And what I hear you saying is, don't give up, right? And that we need to keep at this together. And this is something that started for we women hundreds of years ago. And 100 years ago, we finally got that full participatory right. And now it's time to enact that and encourage other people to do the same.
And
so I want to,
how powerful it is.
That's right.
50% of the population.
That's right.
Right.
Okay, Dr. Kim Garcher, thank you so much for doing this interview. And if anyone has any questions about Philosophy for Girls, you'd be welcome to contact either or both of us. And
you can find our info on our websites or on our university website. So
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
On behalf of the entire planning committee, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Please check out the other segments of our conference on our website. And please do let us know how you utilized the resources provided. Our feedback form and email address are also located on our website. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, remember to vote.